You are watching Hillsborough Television, programming that keeps you informed about the services and activities of your county government.
Hello and welcome to Beyond Today, the program that addresses the future of our community through conversations with people who are working today for a better tomorrow. I'm Ray Shermonte, your host for Beyond Today and Assistant Executive Director for the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission. In our last program, we discussed the major issues of schools in our community. Today, we want to look at one of our county's treasures, the Hillsborough River. Our guests today are Sylvia Espinola, Chairperson for the Hillsborough River Technical Advisory Committee, and Alan Wright, who serves as staff to the TAC, as well as the Hillsborough River Interlocal Planning Boards. Sylvia has been a valuable volunteer, and Alan is a staff member of the Planning Commission and has become known as Mr. River. Sylvia, I'd like to first ask you what your history in Tampa is and how you came to be so involved with the Hillsborough River.
Well, I was born here in Tampa, and I was raised in Ybor City, and we as children went and swam in Sulphur Springs area, which you know is just directly adjacent to the river. Then when I was a little older, we used to go and, believe it or not, swim in what is now under the Martin Luther King Bridge. So the river's been a part of my life since I was a child. In the early 1980s, my family and I purchased a home on the Hillsborough River. And shortly after moving there, I discovered that there was a lot of things that could be done to improve not only the water quality, but also the recreational opportunities on the river. So that's basically how my interest started in the river.
Alan, how did you get involved with the river?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, and I moved to Tampa in the 1980s. An interest in the Hillsborough River was beginning to grow at that point in time, and the initial river study was being done by the Planning Commission, and I was staff support to that, and at the same time the legislation for the River Board and Technical Advisory Council was being written, and the Planning Commission staff was designated to provide staff support to those bodies, and I was fortunate enough to be selected to do that. And that was 12 years ago.
Sylvie, how long have you been involved with the River Board itself?
Well, I've been with the Technical Advisory Council since its inception in 1986. At that time, I was a member of the Technical Advisory Council in my capacity as a member of the Hillsborough River Basin Board with the Southwest Florida Water Management District. Subsequent to that, after retiring off that board, City Council appointed me as their citizen rep to the Technical Advisory Council. So on and off, basically 12 years.
Was there a particular issue that caused this River Board to be created? Usually a problem precedes a board being created. What was going on at the time? Well,
at the time we had a great deal of growth going on in the city of Tampa, and there was a project in the, I guess you would say in the South Seminole Heights area, or a little bit south of that area actually, a housing project or a apartment community that wanted to put in some docks and some boat slips. Ironically enough, it was directly across the river from the Catholic Franciscan Center, and there were some fears on the part of not only the sisters at the Franciscan Center, but also the citizens in the area that the number of boat slips that were being proposed were going to be such that it was going to interfere with their tranquility in that area. So after having approached City Council and many of the other agencies that would regulate or manage the river, they discovered there really was no one body that managed or oversaw these problems on the river. At the same time, it's like Alan was saying earlier, the river study had been initiated by the Planning Commission to see exactly what the issues were on the river. And besides that, then Senator Pat Frank proposed this legislation, Chapter 86-335, which formed the River Board and its Technical Advisory Council.
Great. Alan, can you describe a little bit of the Hillsborough River? I know it has different characteristics. Where does it start?
Right.
And,
the Hillsborough River is really kind of an interesting and unique water body. It starts up at the Green Swamp, which is in Polk and Pasco and Hernando counties, and flows south through Pasco County to Hillsborough County at the northern border, and flows southeasterly through Hillsborough County and then Temple Terrace and then the city of Tampa into Hillsborough Bay. It's about 54 miles long, and the one probably premier structure on the river is the city of Tampa Dam, which is about 10 miles upstream of the mouth.
Is it possible in a boat to go past that dam, or how does that work? You can't?
You couldn't, no.
So you're either on the lower part of the river or the upper part of the river?
Upstream of the dam's freshwater predominantly, and downstream of the dam is a mix of fresh and salt water.
When was that dam constructed?
The original dam was in the late 1800s, but the dam has an interesting history. When they initially built it, it flooded out the cattle range area around what was then the city of Tampa, and the cattlemen did not like that, so they blew the structure up twice. And eventually things calmed down and a little more settlement, and the dam structure was actually built for electrical power, not for a water supply, so that was sort of a side benefit that this has become, and they don't supply electricity from that structure anymore.
Is the upper part of the Hillsborough canoe, Sylvia, maybe you know this too, can you canoe from the source of it, or do you have to start farther down?
You can canoe pretty much most of the river, usually up in the upper reaches above Fletcher Avenue, because you have motorized craft up to that area, right, are allowed?
They're allowed. Depending on the time of year, during the dry season you can canoe probably just a little bit upstream of Crystal Springs, which is in Pasco County, downstream to the dam. And then motorized craft are allowed upstream of Fletcher, but they're not encouraged because that's a more wild area of the river and it's being protected that way.
But the basic place you can start is Crystal Springs, not above that.
Right, and that's most of the time of the year.
Well, getting back a little bit to the Technical Advisory Committee, I understand that citizens also serve on this committee?
That's correct. The composition of the Technical Advisory Council is very interesting because we not only have the regulatory agencies or the managing agencies for the river, but also citizen representatives, one from each of the jurisdictions that borders the river in Hillsborough County. So that would be a citizen from the city of Tampa, one from Hillsborough County, and one from Temple Terrace. In addition to that, we have a member on our committee from the EPC, from DEP, from SwiftMud, from the Basin Board of SwiftMud, from the Regional Planning Council, from the Planning Commission. Who have I left out, Alan? That's pretty much it. So it's very good composition because if a question comes up, for example, about the submerged lands or the land under the river, then the Port Authority would be there to address that issue. If it's a water quality issue, we'd either have EPC or DEP. If it's a flood issue, we would have SwiftMud or the Basin Board. So we have adequate technical expertise on there to go ahead and make recommendations and to help us with planning ideas. And at the same time, you have the citizen reps who can bring in the problems that they're having in their respective communities.
Now, the Technical Advisory Committee, that makes recommendations to the full River Board?
That's correct, and that also is an interesting concept because they are the accountable individuals. They are the elected representatives of the respective jurisdictions again, the Hillsborough County Commission, Tampa City Council, and Temple Terrace City Council. So whatever recommendations we make to them, ideally, what should happen is those should go back to the respective jurisdictions, and most of the time they do.
What is the breakdown of that board as far as, you mentioned the 3 jurisdictions, but who is on that board and how many board members are there?
There's just 3 members.
Oh, so 1 member from each jurisdiction.
Which makes it a lot easier to manage, and they will naturally, if an issue comes up that affects their jurisdiction, they will take it back, for example, to Tampa City Council. At this point, a representative on there is Councilman Buckhorn, and he would discuss it, or he would bring forth the ideas that the Technical Advisory Council has regarding a specific issue as it relates to the city, and vice versa. Ideally, the situation is that the City Council or the County Commission would give any type of issues that have anything to do with the river to the River Board member to give to us to look into it on a technical basis.
Do you have a time frame that you have to act within, like many other government agencies do, on issues?
Time frame would depend on, for example, on a Port Authority permit. If they bring it to us, they have a certain amount of time that they have to act on it before they have to take it to the full Port Authority. So we try to get it into our agenda. We do meet once a month, the second Tuesday of every month. So meeting on a monthly basis, we have the ability to look at these issues as they come up. But as far as having to meet, there is nothing in the legislation that says we have to meet at any particular time. This has just been the schedule that we have found has been the easiest for us to manage the number of problems or the number of issues that come before us.
Alan, the Hillsborough River, what are the conditions there at this point? Is it a very pristine river, or what are the pollution problems in that river?
Well, first of all, let me describe the river in a way that the original river plan lays it out. Upstream of Fletcher is called the rural portion of the river, which is predominantly agricultural use. And probably the primary source of pollution there is just animal runoff. And fertilizers and pesticides to some degree. And then downstream of Fletcher to the dam is what they call the suburban river. In there it's primarily pesticides and herbicides that are overused on people's yards and are washed into the river via stormwater. And then downstream of the dam to the downtown area is the urban portion of the river, which is pretty much the same as the suburban, except it's even more intense. And then you have the urban core, which is actually the downtown portion where the bigger buildings are. You've got some public space down there, and I guess the pollution problem there might be just the ebb and flow of the bay as it comes in and out, depending on what's there.
Now, is there a vast difference? I know that's something that people don't think about, like animal runoff in a rural area, but that is a form of pollution.
Sure.
How does the quality of the water compare in the different sections?
Well, actually, overall, we've been monitoring the water quality of the river, and since we've been doing that, the water quality has improved. And there have been steps taken. Once these problems are identified, things can be done, such as setbacks from animals pasturing even near the river, or using best management practices in growing crops and limiting the amount of herbicides and pesticides that are used.
Now, how successful has that been? Is this an advisor? You advise the farmers, and are they cooperative, or how's that working?
Right, they're very cooperative. I think that's one thing that you'll find, particularly with the Hillsborough River, is if you point out a problem, that people are really willing to work with us to do whatever it is that needs to be done.
That's good. Well, we'll be returning to Beyond Today in a few minutes to continue discussing the Hillsborough River. Welcome back to Beyond Today. I'm your host, Ray Shermonti, and we've been discussing the River Board and Technical Advisory Committee's efforts to protect the Hillsborough River. I'd like to talk about some specific river issues and problems in our second half. And one of the issues that I hear people talk about is Sulphur Springs, and I know that is a part of the river. I guess, does that supply water to the river?
It can. It's kind of a backup situation for the City of Tampa's water supply. It also, in the past, has provided habitat for manatees. We have manatees in the Hillsborough River all year round. Environmentally, they're only supposed to be in there, from October to April or May, but we have had sightings all year round. So Sulphur Springs is an area that they typically come to. The city is in the process of rehabilitating that area. Although the spring will not be open again, the city is proposing to put in a pool park situation, correct, Alan? Mm-hmm. That will allow the residents of the area to enjoy that part of the city of Tampa. The spring, years ago, we had reports of cave divers that went down into the springs and dove down to see exactly what was inside the spring, and that was very interesting, and there's some video on file of that type of activity.
What is down in there?
It's pretty much limestone, isn't it, Alan?
It's a cave.
It's a cave, and they believe it extends all the way from where the spring is, all the way beyond Bush Boulevard, is that correct? Underground, and there was only a certain distance they could go. They had these little automated little motorcycle type things that they took underwater, and they had to have special suits too because they're not real sure what type of pollution is in those springs or from sinkholes. They think there's some sinkhole connection between the springs.
But there is some pollution in the springs.
Oh yes, this is why the spring was closed to swimming.
And primarily stormwater runoff?
Stormwater, mostly from the roads and so forth.
Right.
And also some of the sinkholes were being used improperly for dumping refrigerators and automobiles and things of that nature. That doesn't go real far to keep anything really clean. So,
have you analyzed, when we talk about stormwater runoff and its effect on the river, what is the main source of the problem with stormwater runoff? I guess my impression it would be possibly automobiles. Is that correct? Or is it just people fertilizing their yards?
well, it's a combination thing. Obviously, in storm events or in very wet seasons such as we've had this past winter, yes, that would be correct, coming from the highways and the roads and so forth and going into the river. But there are also still some stormwater outfalls that go directly into the river at certain areas. And to retrofit those is very, very, very expensive, although the city and the county are working to take care of that at this point.
So eventually they would try to treat the stormwater before it went into the river?
We would hope so, yes.
Now, another issue, I guess, is shoreline alteration. Alan, can you tell us why it's bad to alter the shoreline?
Sure. As you know, probably the Hillsborough River's shoreline is hardened, or what we call hardened, protected pretty much from the mouth all the way up to probably the city dam. And the primary reason for that right now is to protect the shoreline from motorboat wake erosion. There's also the need to protect the shoreline from the tidal influence. And the reason it really is not beneficial to the river to have a hardened shoreline is it actually creates erosion below the line of the structure itself, of the seawall. And it also makes the wave action, when as a boat goes by, it makes that far more destructive to the river. And it also takes away habitat for wildlife that live along the river, and those are probably the primary reasons.
Is there any program to try to return some of the shoreline to a natural state?
The Tampa Port Authority policy, which I think we've had some influence in, they are not permitting new seawalls except under certain special circumstances. And they urge you, if you have to replace an old seawall, to come to them and ask what kind of alternative techniques are available, which would be like a sloped shoreline that's planted with vegetation. So you still have the benefit of protecting your shoreline, but you're also providing habitat. And it's also a means of cleaning water as it comes into the river.
There's also a publication, or I don't know if it's a publication, but there was a pamphlet put out by the Planning Commission staff, as a matter of fact, that addresses all the different types of shorelines and the ways to put them up and so forth. And these pamphlets are being distributed not only through the Planning Commission, but also when the Port Authority issues a permit or someone comes in for a permit, they give them one of these so that they can see what's available to them as far as shoreline treatment.
I guess there's some other development issues just besides hardening the shorelines along the river. What do you see as the primary issues of development along the river?
You mean new development?
Mm-hmm.
Well, new development obviously would probably either have to take place in the urban core or in whatever isolated parcels are left in the more residential core, like north and east of Columbus Drive there, because from Fletcher north, most of those lands are protected either by the Water Management District or by the county, so there won't be any development coming in there. But I would think that one of the things that I would hate to see is, I would hate to see a situation, especially in the urban core, where we have high-rise buildings or these big towers that are directly adjacent to the river and don't allow for any green space, which brings us to another thing we try to address, which is public access along the river. We know that's not always possible, and we know that especially in private parcels, you know, property owners are going to be very thrilled about having someone come through their backyard. But if it is a new development coming in and it's something that is going to be occupied by either an office building, a hotel, whatever, a restaurant, that public access would be a nice amenity to have, and have some type of setback from that water so you don't have that cluttering effect right on the water.
Now, if someone is coming in with a development, as you mentioned, would they be required to go to the river board?
They're not required, per se, required to, but with the number of agencies that are involved with the River Board and the Technical Advisory Council, at some point they usually do.
So they just do that kind of as a courtesy, knowing that the River
Right.
Board
Well,
will have
for example,
input.
and also for us to be able to assist them with certain issues they have. One example that comes to mind right now is we have a new high school that just was built on the river, and they came to us from the beginning, and they brought us their plans, and they brought us their site plan, and they said, you know, how do you feel about this, or how do you feel about that, and we gave them our input. Obviously, they couldn't give us 100% of everything we wanted to see, but they got a lot of input from us, which assisted them in putting it up, and I feel it's come out really nice. In addition to which, we were able to kind of assist them get together with the City of Tampa to allow for some green space between the school and the river. So that was something that we were happy we got.
I think that that's interesting that you brought up the idea of having input to make the project better. Besides, you mentioned green space. Was there other changes that came about because of the River Board's involvement?
The stormwater retention issue. Midway through that project, there had been some changes in the engineering firms and architectural firms that were handling it, and they had placed the retention pond too close to the river. So that was changed in the review process, and we felt real good about that too. So
That's
it was a
great.
win-win for us.
I think many times when people see developments, they don't realize maybe how these things came about and the different bodies that are involved. Alan, I know you probably get tired of talking about manatees, but I have to bring them up. Something that Sylvia said prompted me. She said that manatees are in the Hillsborough River all year, and that's not a normal thing. Why is that?
Well, I don't know that it's not a normal thing, but people don't expect to run across manatees in the lower portion of the river. Obviously, they can't be upstream of the dam. But they are. They're here year-round, and there is a protective idle speed, no wake zone through the downtown area south of Columbus to Platt Street during the fall and winter months. And then there's also an idle speed, no wake zone from what is now called the Jean Street Marina, which is south of Sly, all the way to the city dam. And the main purpose there is to protect the manatees that are going to Sulphur Springs. And the problem there is the channel is so narrow, and the water depth is variable, and it's not all that deep. Manatees need to have a way to get away from a boat, so if you have a slower moving boat, a manatee has a better chance.
Now, manatees basically come in from the bay, is that correct?
That's correct, and they need to come into the river, particularly during cold seasons, just for the warmth. They can't really survive anything less than 65 degrees. And they also need fresh water to drink, which they're getting at Sulphur Springs. And then there's an area about a quarter to half a mile upstream of Sulphur Springs. It's known as Hannah's Swirl. It's a real sharp turn in the river. And we've had several manatee births at that place. And we continue to watch that and make sure that that continues to be protected.
Now, I never knew that a manatee needs to drink fresh water, so that's why they tend to live near the coast?
Well, that's why they always are near a freshwater spring, and they seem to know just instinctively where those are, but they are along the coastline or along rivers.
So I guess what would explain them being in the river is probably Sulphur Springs attracting them.
That would be a lot of it. Also, they're vegetation eaters. That's all they eat, and they eat the vegetation where they can find it along the shoreline. Another reason not to harden your shoreline is so that manatees have something to eat.
They
along
eat the
way.
vegetation that even grows out of the water then?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now, I know there's been a lot of interest in the river in the last few years because there's a river cleanup every year. Can you tell us about that and how effective it's been?
I think we had the first one back in 1987, and I think there may have been maybe 20 of us at that time, and it's just mushroomed. At this point, the City of Tampa has one, the mayor sponsors one every year in November, and Temple Terrace has one. The county kind of coordinates theirs with the one that the city has. So it's been very successful. They pull out all kinds of things, shopping carts, a lot of styrofoam. We originally got some of the styrofoam generators, people that would, food places and that used to use styrofoam to help us with the cleanup, and for some reason that seems to have helped a little, cut down a little bit on the styrofoam, I think. But I think we have to remember that the Hillsborough River is the primary source of drinking water for the City of Tampa. And the way the legislation was written, it states that that is our primary concern, that the river is to ensure the drinkability of the water. So these are things that we have to look at also. Besides the citizen issues and the setbacks and the development issues, we have to be sure that there is sufficient water and water of the quality that we can have to drink, because that's our primary source of drinking water.
Well, I think what you brought up about the river cleanup is real important, because I think people even being aware that there's a cleanup every year might make them think about polluting the river less than they might otherwise. And I think the example of the fast food restaurants was a good one. And they have helped participate in the cleanup?
Yes, absolutely. And we've also had some of the recycling people join in, and the city is real good about sending out their trucks to get some of these recyclable things. So it's kind of a coordinated effort. And when we were doing it, we used to try to include the high school groups for they had to do community service and like that, because you reach that age group, they seem to carry it with them when they, you know, waist deep in that water pulling stuff out of it. It kind of sticks with you all through your life.
Hopefully not literally. Yeah. Just looking, I guess, in closing, talking about the quality, has the quality gotten better, gotten worse, or stayed the same over the last 20 years? What's been the result?
Well, EPC, who is one of the agencies that sits on our board, regularly monitors these different sites, and it has improved in the last, what, 10? Well, we've been in here since 86, 12 years, has considerably improved.
Now, is that in both sections of the river, the lower part and the upper part, or just the lower?
As far as they can monitor, which I think is up to the flood detention area.
Which would be the dam, I guess?
No,
or,
beyond that.
Farther, okay.
Beyond that.
So really the whole river then has improved,
Right.
because I hear that the bay's improved also, so I guess that would affect
We would
the
like to
river.
take credit for all of it, obviously, but I don't think we can. I think it has a lot to do with weather conditions, rain, no phosphates in your detergents and things of that nature has helped a lot.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you. I think what you're doing is very important, and for being a part of protecting our source of drinking water here in Tampa. Again, I'd like to thank today's guest for talking with us about the Hillsborough River. Next month we plan on talking about community rebirth. Let us know if you have comments about today's show. You can reach us at our hotline or on email. I'm Ray Charmonti, and on behalf of the Planning Commission, I thank you for thinking beyond today.